All right, let's shift gears now and move to politics. The past weekend, the ANC in the Northwest has held its list conference, but as you know, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The process was marred by differences and intimidation. The conference was eventually concluded on Monday night in Orkney, and most importantly, there is a final list. ANC's Moloko Moloto witnessed it all and joins me now from our newsroom camera. So this list conference, Moloko, to what extent did it go in sort of dealing with issues of disunity and factionalism in the Northwest?
Well, Tulas, you would remember that the Northwest Province tried on several occasions to hold that particular list conference, and in one instance we saw there was incidents of violence to a point where one delegate was even stabbed. But in the end, last weekend they managed to hold this conference, and I must indicate that contrary to on previous occasions, we saw delegates, as much as they were expressing their differences, there was tolerance. There was never any incident indicating that, at any given time they could be on each other's throats. This is despite the fact that there were several delays. It was meant to begin officially on Saturday at about 6 p.m. But voting, and you remember that voting was the sole business of that particular conference, and it was delayed by 2 days. But still, delegates were behaving properly. They were never on each other's throats. This is despite the fact that factions and divisions in that province are well entrenched.
Yeah, well entrenched is actually, I think, the proper word, because you and I know that in the build-up to this conference, there were all sorts of allegations of exclusion and questions being asked of the provincial task team that the ANC's National Executive Committee put in place to oversee the affairs of the ANC in that province. So are you telling me, was the conference, for example, representative of the various interests?
Well, it would depend on which side of the fence you are sitting from. I mean, for instance, if you are a supporter of Supra Mahumapelo, who was chairperson in the ANC, if you consider the fact that he himself is on the list, he is somewhere down to 29. I think he's on position 29, and only 33. The legislature can only take 33 members. So chances are, given the fact that the ANC really can no longer say that it's a given that they will continue to get a high number of MPLs. It's not clear whether he will be able to even become MPL. On the one hand, you have, for instance, the the ANC Women's League accusing the PTT, saying that it seemed as if that they were more interested in positions, yet they were brought to that province to unite the warring factions. For instance, the secretary of the ANC Women's League in that province told me that 95% of the people in the PTT were interested in contesting or becoming MPLs or MPs. So that particular decision, and the PTT defended that decision to say that, look, it's not different compared to other provinces where you have PECs, because even in the National Executive Committee, the members there, they have an interest. So,
yeah. So as things stand now, then, Moloko, we have Job Mogoro as Premier of the Northwest. You've seen the list.
Yeah.
What does it look like? Who are the names that are there? Because it's important. I mean, after the elections, it's quite possible that this possibly is the list from which the ANC's leadership will choose 3 names and whittle it down to 1 name for the person to become Premier.
No, that is very true. I mean, so far I have seen the draft list, which was prepared, and later it was presented. In fact, yesterday it was presented by the Provincial List Committee to the PTT, and it was amended. But remember, 25%, it's a list of about 41 people. 25% of that list, which would be 8 people, there's not much, that can be done. So they're not going to make any changes or amendments on the 8 people who are on top. And it is topped by, interestingly, Kabelo Matabore, the man who at some point was the secretary of the ANC in that province, and he was paged by Subra Mahumapelo and supporters of former President Jacob Zuma ahead of Mangaung. So it's as if that you are seeing the return of people who were opposing Subra Mahumapelo, and also Matota Sambata, who is the secretary of the SACP in Northwest. He is also MEC of Health. Remember, he was brought back by the current Premier Job Mokhoro after Subra Mahumapelo, when he was still Premier, fired him as MEC of Public Works. So you have these people who were against Subra Mahumapelo making inroads. On the one hand, you have, for instance, well, almost all the MECs are in the list. Of course, some of them are down there. There's no guarantee that they will return as MPLs and subsequently as MECs. There's just one MEC, interestingly, the MEC of Finance, who, when Subra Mahumapelo went on leave shortly before he was fired as Premier, Wendy Nelson, that is, was appointed as acting Premier. She is not on the list. So chances are she's, unless if the ANC perhaps at the NEC level or somehow whatever if they happen to adjust the list or include her. But as matters stand, she is not on the list. She will not return to the legislature.
So with that list in mind, Moloko, are we able to read anything of the influence, the political influence of former Premier and former ANC chairperson there, Subra Mahumapelo?
Well, when we were there, when we interacted with supporters of Subra Mahumapelo, they indicated that he is no longer interested in becoming chairperson. Of course, we know that there is a court case that's underway on at the end of January. That matter is going to be held in court, wherein a faction that's led by Subra Mahumapelo is contesting the decision of the National Executive Committee to disband the PEC that he was leading. But in case he loses that one, the intention is that he's going to contest as the secretary of the ANC in Northwest. That's what some of his supporters told me. Now, on the one hand, you have Kabelo Matabore, as I indicated earlier. He was previously secretary of the ANC. The aim, as I'm told by some of his people, is to contest after, when the ANC in that province goes to the provincial elective conference, he wants to become the chairperson of the ANC there. Now, you remember, as you pointed out earlier, that there would be 3 names that must be forwarded to the National Executive Committee, from which the NEC must elect the Premier candidate. Job Mokhoro is in position number 6. Of course, it doesn't mean that Kabelo, since he's got more numbers, it doesn't guarantee him the premiership position.
All right, thank you so much for that, ENCA's Moloko Moloto. Watching political developments in the Northwest, particularly to do with the ANC.